Hi, I'm sitting down on my bed, so forgive the different background, but I wanted to go more in depth about my gender identity and gender in general because a lot of people have been very interested in it. So, I have a few things written down that I want to hit on, specifically, let's start with my personal experience and then what other people experience. So, let's get into it. Firstly, I want to identify the definition of transgender and what it means. So, to be trans is to identify as a gender that's different from the gender you were assigned at birth. So, for me, I was assigned female at birth, but since I added on man and non binary to my gender identity, that makes me trans. I also went through a mental transition, which I'll talk more about in just a second. So, let me grab my drink. I got some Starbucks. Okay. So, for me, I started realizing that I was transgender when I was a teenager, like 13, 14. And one thing that I realize now is that looking back, I used to be called tomboy and, boyish girl, that sort of thing a lot when I was a kid. I used to be called tomboy a lot, especially by a parent of my friend. And my mom always was like, oh, she doesn't really like these girly things, girly toys. She's sort of a tomboy. She just likes playing in the dirt and playing with like dinosaurs and dragons and doing stuff with her dad. She must be she's very connected to her dad. She's must like the boyish things he does because my dad is very male and traditionally male. And so for me, hearing the word boy in tomboy was giving me a sense of euphoria for something I didn't even understand because I wasn't taught about transness and being a different trans identity yet. That was something I learned when I was a teenager and I had moved out of central New York, out of a place that's more conservative than Western Washington State is and the Seattle area is. So I hadn't learned what being trans was until I was a teenager. And so I didn't know that I was this identity the whole time. Now, it's not like my parents were forcing me to be a girl. Like I said, I played with different toys as a kid, and that's not necessarily a sign of being trans, it's just my experience. And so my mom was never like, you can only play with girly things, and no, no, no. She was very accepting because my sister, who at the time was my brother, she would dress up in my clothes all the time, all the time. Oh, I always got so frustrated with her for it. But, my mom was accepting of that and said, you know what? My son is probably gay, and this is my sign. And she's always been accepting of that. And later on, my brother did come out as gay when he was still my brother. And that was perfectly fine for them to do. That was perfectly fine for us all. And so, but gender was not talked about as much as your sexuality in my family, just because we didn't really know a whole lot about it. And it's nobody's fault. That's just the way the education system was in New York State, especially upstate New York near Syracuse. So when I learned about what being trans was and how dysphoria feels and how euphoria feels, mostly through online groups and things like that, hearing other people's experiences with gender, that's when I started realizing, hey, I go through this too. This is something I can relate to. And for the longest time, I was, in denial about it. That's a lot of trans people go through. They're like, oh no, I'm not trans. I just, am a tomboy. Or I just like different things. And that's perfectly fine. And a lot of people, that's perfectly fine for them. There are plenty of women who are tomboyish. And that works for them. They can just stay as a woman. But for me, it didn't work that way. And it just wasn't right. There was always something that I felt was missing. And So I needed to find that piece of my identity because it always felt like something wasn't right. And it really came to like a head when I was probably about 15 years old, maybe 14, 15, and I was getting ready for bed and my pajamas were all pink and girly and, traditionally feminine. And I got so horrifically upset. I was so sad. I had this overwhelming feeling of dysphoria. I felt dysphoria. It sucks. It's horrible. I haven't had it a whole lot, so I can't say I know everything about it. But I felt how it feels. Just a little touch of it. And I hated my clothes. It was not a good reflection of who I was at that point in my life. And I mean, people go through that without changing their gender identity. People will be like, oh, these clothes just don't match who I am anymore. It was like that a lot, but it was very much connected to how people perceive me as a person and how people will refer to me when they say ma'am or sir, things like that. And I hated the idea of people calling me a girl at that point. I did not want people to call me a girl. I didn't want people to see me as a girl. I wanted people in that moment to see me as either a boy or androgynous, or like, no gender, or something in the middle. I didn't really know at the time. So I underwent this mental transition starting at that point, where I realized, okay, I'm having dysphoria. How can I, first of all, mentally adjust so that I can refer to myself as man, as non-binary, as androgynous? And so what I did was, while I was creating all of these at the same time I was starting my language and I was starting to create all of these translations for different words, I said, why don't I translate my name and give myself a different name? And I could call myself that name because gender is very neutral in my language and in my world that I'm writing for this book. Gender is a lot more neutral. And I mean, I've adjusted that more and more as time went on, to make it more neutral, because that's the natural way I see things progressing is, gender will become more of an accepted thing and more of a neutral thing, and people won't really care how you identify, and you can call yourself whatever you want, There could be a dad who goes by mom, and nobody will give a crap, that sort of thing. So, how I saw it was, I needed a new name to just refer to myself, and I needed to start with me, because if I wasn't fulfilling myself, how could anybody else be fulfilling for me, right? So I created the name, I'll just do Emili, because there's no Y in my language, so Emili, that would be pronounced Ermili. No, that doesn't sound right to me. That is a little bit too much to pronounce. It just feels like a mouthful. I don't like it. So I played around with that idea for a while, and I eventually came up with the name Miri, Milri, and the LR means that you have to roll your R in my language, so Miri. And I started referring to myself as that name, and I still refer to myself as that name today because it's more neutral than Emily. I don't mind that people call me Emily. It's probably much easier to pronounce, especially if you can't roll your R's or anything like that. So I just go by Emily for other people, Miri for me. And it's still kind of hard for me to roll my R's because I had to practice a lot when I was learning this language, right? So I went through this mental transition where I had to change my entire perception of myself and change how the world saw me. And it was reflected in real life as well, not just in my head. of I changed my wardrobe, I changed my hairstyle, I cut my hair. I used to have the longest hair. It went all the way down like to my lower back, and I hated it. I hated having long hair because it was so much upkeep, and it was so much just to be called girl only and have nobody see past that. So I cut my hair and I made it into a bob. That way I would look more neutral. And, you know, some people might even perceive me from behind as a boy with, you know, just very luscious waves. And that really excited me. That was very, very exciting for me. And I could not wait. I loved my bob. I loved how I looked, how it framed my face, how my face looked neutral, how, you know, all of that. And at the time, I didn't wear any makeup at all so that I would appear more neutral, and also because I knew you didn't need makeup to look beautiful, but that's a whole other conversation we can have a different time. My mom made sure to teach me that very young because once she caught me in the mirror with a lipstick, like a toy lipstick for little kids that's like edible and all that, no harmful ingredients and stuff. She caught me in the mirror going, "I must be pretty." And she was like, "Okay, it's time to take that away from you because you are learning some very unhealthy habits." So she made sure to teach me that, you know, you're beautiful no matter what you were born with, and you need to learn to just adjust the features to be more yourself. And that's the same thing with being trans, is you were given these features, you just have to learn to tweak and adjust them a little bit, you know, whether that's through surgery, like Dylan went through just recently on TikTok, whether that's through surgery, through makeup, as I'm doing now, through hair differences, you know, as I did before, through clothing, how that reflects off your face, you know, your skin tone, all of that is important. And so, yeah, it was this crazy mental transition that I went through, and it took a couple of years, and I'm still learning new things and refining my gender as I'm going along. I'll probably be refining it for the rest of my life, you know? Because we all have to be open to learning new things and accepting new things. And especially now that we're in an age where people can, you know, dig up the past and dig up cultures that have always had different views on gender and personality and identity. Now we can see those cultures for the first time in hundreds of years, and that helps to shape other people, you know? As I talked about in my TikTok, if you happen to be Native Hawaiian and you lived in like mainland America and you had no idea that this other gender even existed, I'm not going to try to pronounce it, I'm sorry. I think it's Mahu, Mahu. And so I don't want to butcher that too much, just out of respect. That's just how I want to respect that. But so if you happened to be Native Hawaiian and you didn't know that that third gender existed, but now we're in an age where you can learn about that on TikTok. You know, there's a certain guy I follow on TikTok who's Native Hawaiian, and he talks about all this stuff. You could go, "Oh my God, that's who I am." And I didn't even know that. And so it's just a crazy time and a beautiful time to be experimenting with gender and take it to new levels. There's going to be a lot of haters. Oh man, I know all about the haters. You have no idea. I had to just deal with it just now in the comments of, you know, my TikTok talking about what does trigender mean and how does it work. That's specifically the title I did. How does trigender work? There's a lot of haters out there, but you know what? We're in an age now, you can just block them and they're gone and they won't ever bother you again. I mean, they can certainly try. They can make alternate accounts and follow you everywhere you go, but then that's where you get restraining orders involved, you know? Things like that. I'm gonna grab my drink again. But just remember that, and also, I do want to say, when it comes to actually understanding, okay, I should frame it like this. There's a big difference between, for me at least, between trigender and gender fluid. It's close, technically, in how you identify, how you feel. You'll feel very similarly. I will feel very similarly to a gender fluid person. And that's kind of how I discovered trigender existed, is I met somebody who's gender fluid in high school. And they taught me a lot about my gender, even though we didn't talk a whole lot. I learned so much from them, and I'm so happy that I met them. And I was like, oh my God, you have the option to just change your gender all the time? That sounds wonderful to me. I want that. I want to be able to have people perceive me as all of these things, but the only difference is I want them to see me as all of these things all the time. I don't want to just be seen as a woman in one part of my time and then change it to man in a different part of my time. Although that's kind of how I express myself, is it'll shift a little bit. Sorry, this is my drink. It'll shift a little bit. So like today, I have the cut of these shoulders. It's like a muscle shirt. This LGBT flag shirt. And it makes me feel more masculine. This is definitely a masculine shirt for my masculine days. But it's a lot more stable than gender fluid is, where it's very liquid. And you feel either 1, 2, or 3 genders more strongly than any other gender, and you feel certain pronouns more than other pronouns, and you want to be referred to as a certain thing rather than anything else. So, but for me, I want to be all 3 all the time. Or at least the 3 I identify as. There's not just 3 genders. There's a lot. Because there's a lot of different cultures in the world, and that's the main thing. And so, to a gender fluid person, there is, what they sometimes do is they'll wear a bracelet that is color coordinated with typical gender identity. So I'll wear a pink one today because I'm feeling more feminine. And tomorrow I'll wear a blue one because I'm feeling more masculine. And then the next day I'll wear something androgynous or non-binary or any word you want to use for that. It could be green, white, orange, yellow, I don't know, whatever they feel. And I'll wear that one the next day because I feel non-binary today, or I feel a third gender that's associated with my culture today, or I feel androgynous or agender, where I have no gender at all. And I don't want to feel like I have a gender. For some people, that can feel like a big burden to have a gender. As I understand it, it's sort of this stressor to think I have a gender. It's very difficult to go through. And so to be agender is to just say, it's just a complete and total rejection of gender altogether. And it's its own sort of spectrum where, one person will reject it completely and one person just rejects certain aspects of gender and that sort of thing. But, my mouth popped. Did you hear that? That was neat. Where was I? So, it's very complex. All of it is very complex. Gender is very complex. And just being open to these new ideas is really all you need to get by. You can ask questions. It's not a harmful thing to ask, as long as you're trying to be polite about it, right? So, and people, more often than not, especially people who are transgender, will be open and excited to talk to you about it because it's a big part of their identity that they don't get to share with everyone because so many people are so avidly against it. You know what I mean? And so it feels like something they have to hide, and to know that they don't have to hide who they truly are around you and that you're a safe person, that can be so exciting for a trans person. And they will, jump out of their chair to be like, yes, here's how I identify, here's how I want you to perceive me, and here's all of the information I have about that in my experience, So it's, it's very special to meet people who are, as I would call you, an ally, because you're open to this new experience and this experience that you don't live. So now I want to talk more about more non-binary people in history, just to sort of showcase different, cultures that have non-binary and different genders in it. So I have it written down on my iPad here, so forgive me if I look down and refer to it. I'll try to keep it close to the camera so that I look like I'm still looking at you and paying attention to you. So, first of all, there's Native Hawaiian, as I talked about. They have a third gender, MAHU, and it's a very key part of their society. Then, in a somewhat similar fashion, there is Two-Spirit, which is more Native American, Native Canadian. I'm not sure about Native Alaskan or Native parts of Mexico, so please let me know if you know anything about that. But Two-Spirit is essentially this story in Native American culture where you were born with the powers of both a man and a woman. And so to be non-binary in that sense, for as much as I understand it, is mostly you have the powers of both and neither at the same time, I think. Please forgive me if I'm wrong on this. And so you were blessed and you were a very high member of society. There were lots of non-binary people in Native American societies who were leaders and who healers and key members of their society. It was not in any way looked down upon or looked on as a detriment to survival. No, there was so much of it was important because you had the power of either both man and woman or neither man and woman. And so you were very special and a very respected member of these Native American cultures. Now, there are some Native American cultures, because we can't overgeneralize, of course. There were thousands of different, if not millions and trillions of different tribes in the Native American Americas. And so some tribes did not see a third gender, some tribes did. And these days, the tribes who saw a third gender and understand gender differently than the traditional colonial idea are all banding together to support the LGBT community. Because if you were even gay, you were seen as having the powers of both a man and a woman, because you could love like a woman to another man. If you're assuming that this person, identifies as a man, you had the powers to love another man as a woman typically loves a man. And you were seen as having the ability to build your body like a man and present like a man. So you had these different powers. And then there was another culture. Navajo Indigenous Americans especially have been known to have non-binary genders. They actually have a different name for it than Two-Spirit. I can link it in my description if you want to learn more about that. And then India. In India, there was a third gender in some Indian cultures. I can link that as well. I'll link the whole article that I'm learning this from and referencing. But there were people all over the world, and, I actually found in a different article, Inanna of Mesopotamia, in the first city-states that ever existed, the first cities that were ever built, there was Inanna, who was later known as Ishtar, goddess of sex, war, justice, and was queen of heaven. She was known to have the power to change people's gender. And so there are tons of stories out there in old Mesopotamian culture where somebody's gender changes. For example, a man changed their gender to a woman because of Ishtar's power, or Inanna's power, however you want to refer to them. And so this has always existed. This is not something new. This is not just a trend, It's always been around. And I'm very honored to be one of the people who's taking up the torch and is helping people discover that these societies exist, and to recognize that these societies exist and bring them back to life in a way. It's such an honor to be able to do that, even if it's just for one person. You want to help all the people that you can to learn new things. It's very important in this life to learn as much as you can. So there was that. And then, as I mentioned in my TikTok, gender is very complicated, and it is a spectrum, and there are multiple spectrums of gender. I kind of touched on this in the TikTok a little bit, but for me, man is on one side, woman is on the other, and non-binary is in the middle, and then I take up that whole box, and that's kind of the box I'm in. And then agender is outside that box and just kind of floats around it any way that they want, where they reject gender. If this is the woman's side, they reject womanness and femininity, so they lean a little bit masculine but still reject gender. Or if they reject gender altogether, they might be more above the non-binary area where it's more neither. Anything like that. But non-binary, I talked to a lovely person in my comments section on a TikTok who enlightened me that non-binary can be its own spectrum, from neither gender to both genders of man and woman when referring to that. So neither man or woman and both man or woman. And then that's a whole spectrum in its own. And we have to respect that. And I respect that. That's totally valid. And especially if you're, taking up some parts of that, you're here and you're here, or you're here and further, or anything like that. Or you're just one spot on that sort of compass, if you will. And it's very important. Gender is very important to a lot of people, and especially people who aren't always able to express it openly, because they have to hide such a massive part of themselves and how they're perceived. That's why it's important to people. And I hope this little talk helped you learn something new, and I will link some links in the description. If you want to learn more, definitely check those out. And it'll have specific stuff on, the different cultures in the world, and you can go through all that. It has links in the link to talking about each specific culture, like the Indian culture, or Two-Spirit culture, or Navajo culture. And so I hope you've learned something interesting, and even if you just want to listen to me talk about it, I'm happy to talk about it, because gender is very interesting to me. It's, psychological, and I find psychology fascinating. I want to learn a lot about it. So I'm happy to talk about this stuff, and I'm happy to be an advocate for others who don't want to talk about this stuff and want me to say certain things about gender that they cannot, for whatever reason, say for themselves. I am happy to do that. Alright, on that note, I will let you go, and I will see you soon on TikTok with some more lighthearted, fun stuff, and I mean, it's all lighthearted and fun. It's all supposed to be fun, you know? Gender expression is supposed to be fun, and how you perceive yourself in the world is supposed to be fun. You know, this look is fun. It's all for fun. So, I will see you soon with some more fun. Have I said fun enough? Bye!